My name is Danica Rowe. I was standing at the edge of a ballroom packed with stars and stripes medals, and murmurs the scent of leather polish and expensive perfume hanging in the air. It was the kind of evening that made people stand up a little straighter. A homecoming gala for Operation Silver Shield, classified in detail, glorified in spirit. But the real reason the room buzzed was because a certain officer, one who'd led the mission without losing a single life, was to be honored tonight. They didn't know it was me. I stood behind the crest-adorned dais, partially shadowed by the insignia wall, and a row of ranking officers. I could see the back of the room clearly. That's where they were, my parents, my brother, laughing, chatting, holding drinks like social armor. They hadn't come for me, of course. They came because my cousin Logan, a junior specialist in my unit, had invited them out of courtesy. They thought he was the hero. 2 chairs sat up front, reserved for the guest of honor's family. Empty. I didn't feel nervous. I felt quiet. And then from the podium, the commanding general turned toward me. His voice filled the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the architect of Operation Silver Shield, General Danica Rowe." I stepped forward. From the far corner of the room, I heard my brother's voice, loud and confused. "Wait, who is she?" The silence after that, it was louder than any salute I've ever heard. The first time they didn't show, I still made excuses for them. It was my officer commissioning ceremony, held in a small theater on the edge of the State University campus. Nothing grand, just pressed uniforms, polished boots, and the exhausted pride of a dozen cadets who had dragged themselves through 4 years of early mornings and silent discipline. I'd called them the week before, practically vibrating through the phone. My mother promised they'd be in the front row. I even marked 2 seats on the aisle with their names. I was 19, still believing a promise meant something. But when they called my name, and the silver bars were pinned to my shoulders, the seats stayed empty. They probably hit traffic, I told myself. Something came up. They'll be here by the end. They weren't. Instead, after the ceremony, I stood in my dress uniform behind a column and called them. My mother picked up after a few rings, her voice cheerful, like she had just gotten out of yoga. "Oh, sweetie, today was your thing, right? I'm so sorry Tucker's Jeep wouldn't start, and he had this huge draft party for fantasy football. You know how much that means to him." I didn't say anything. My silence must have made her uncomfortable, because she added, "We'll make it up to you. Maybe dinner next weekend." I told her it was fine. It wasn't, and it never would be again. That night, I sat alone on the edge of my bunk in the barracks. The metal of the bars on my uniform felt heavy in the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the pinprick-sized dent on the edge of my locker door and thought about how hollow a victory can feel when the people who raised you can't be bothered to show up. Not because they forgot, but because they never believed it mattered. I stopped calling them after that. Not out of spite, not even sadness, just fatigue. The kind that settles deep into your bones when you realize the people you've spent your whole life trying to impress have no interest in knowing who you really are. And from that day on, I stopped trying to explain it to them. I would earn everything on my own, and they would never see it coming. Tucker was the kind of child who turned chaos into charm. He could miss curfew, wreck a bike, forget an anniversary, and my parents would still look at him like he hung the moon. He smiled, wide, shrugged everything off, and made a mess in every direction. But that didn't matter. Tucker was sunshine. And sunshine, no matter how scorching, was always forgiven. I was the opposite. Quiet. Methodical. The kind of kid who color-coded her homework folders and asked for extra practice exams. I didn't demand attention. I earned it and still didn't get any. I remember his 17th birthday like it was carved into my spine. My parents unveiled a brand new Mustang in the driveway, complete with a bow. Tucker whooped so loud the neighbors came outside. 3 months later, he totaled it in a drag race, walked away without a bruise. Mom cried not from fear, but relief. Dad put a hand on Tucker's shoulder and said, "Let's not tell your coach about this, all right." 2 weeks later, they co-signed another loan and bought him something even flashier. That same year, I got a summer job at a diner to save up for used textbooks. When I asked if they could help cover a plane ticket home for Thanksgiving, my mother said, "Things are tight right now, sweetie. You know we're paying Tucker's tuition out of pocket." They were always tight. Except when it came to him. He flunked out of college twice, first business, then film. They said he was exploring his passions. I double majored in criminal justice and military strategy, graduated magna cum laude. They sent flowers, not to me just to post on Facebook for appearances. At first, I thought if I stayed impressive enough, they'd turn their heads, just once. But my success didn't challenge their narrative. It completed it. Danica, the dependable one. The self-sufficient one. The one they never had to worry about. They used that as a shield to justify leaving me behind. Once I made the dean's list and called home beaming. My mother answered mid-laundry. "That's great, hon. But listen, I've got Tucker on the other line. His landlord's being unfair again. I need to handle it." Click. He got their attention through mistakes. I couldn't even earn it through perfection. Over time, I learned to keep my pride to myself. Tucked inside journals, locker drawers, unsent emails. I stopped announcing things. What was the point? Every win I had was a shadow compared to his failures. And somehow they still saw him as the one worth saving. I didn't resent him. Not exactly. Tucker was just playing the role they wrote for him. But I was done playing mine. When I signed the commitment papers for ROTC, my mother blinked twice, then said, "That's interesting," as if I just declared a minor in basket weaving. My father didn't say anything at all, just nodded like I'd mentioned a new workout routine instead of a military oath. They thought it was a phase, a discipline kick, something I'd outgrow once I got tired of waking up before dawn and ironing creases into my shirts. They never came to training weekends, never asked about my unit. When I got certified in battlefield intelligence operations, Mom sent a text that said, "Proud of you, sweetie. Just be safe, okay?" Followed by a gif of a puppy saluting. To them, the uniform was a costume, a quirk. But for me, it was the only place that ever made sense. The Army didn't care if I was quiet or efficient or too serious for my age. It didn't ask me to explain my competence or apologize for being prepared. It gave me structure, clarity, purpose, and people who understood loyalty as more than a performance. I deployed twice before I turned 30. The missions were brutal. Dust-filled, sleep-deprived, held together by caffeine and gut instinct. But I never flinched. I earned my captain bars during a classified evacuation op in the Altai Corridor, 37 lives pulled from a trap with less than 10 minutes on the clock. My name was passed upward in silence. I didn't even know I'd been recommended for promotion until my CO handed me the citation with a nod. I mailed the ribbon home in a flat envelope tucked inside a blank card. No note, just proof. They didn't call, they didn't ask. I don't think they ever opened it. What they did do was tag me in a Facebook memory a few weeks later, Tucker in his high school football uniform, muddy and smiling with the caption, "Our champ." I stopped trying after that. Not out of bitterness, just clarity. I didn't need their permission to matter. I didn't need applause from people who never showed up to the theater. I had my orders. I had my mission. That was enough. The further I rose, the more distant they became. Calls were rare, usually only when something fell apart around Tucker. His DUI, his third attempt at rehab, his latest breakup. My mother would start with, "Honey, I hate to ask, but..." I learned to say no, calmly, politely, without guilt, because for once I had boundaries. And boundaries, unlike hopes, don't bend. I returned home under classified orders and silence. The event was billed as a homecoming gala for the completion of Operation Silver Shield, a campaign too confidential to explain, but too consequential to ignore. The venue was a city convention hall draped in flags and photographs, soft jazz playing beneath the clinking of cutlery and the hum of polished speeches. I arrived through a side entrance, uniformed, decorated, and largely unrecognizable to the people I once called family. That was intentional. At the head table, I sat beside the commanding general. To my left was a colonel I once pulled from a collapsed checkpoint. To my right, an empty seat for ceremony. We were all shielded by protocol, by rows of medals and brass nameplates, by the illusion that this evening was just another honor among many. But behind the shield, I scanned the crowd, and there they were. My mother in a powder blue jacket, my father in a suit he hadn't worn since Tucker's second wedding, and Tucker himself standing near the dessert table, already regaling someone with a story, one hand gesturing toward the stage. They didn't know I was here. They hadn't come for me. Logan, my younger cousin, and one of my field techs had invited them last minute out of politeness. He hadn't mentioned names, just that someone important from his unit was being honored, and that his family should come show support. They showed up dressed smiling, ready to collect the proximity glow of someone else's medal. They never imagined it would be mine. I watched them take their seats toward the back. My mother looked around with that pleasant expression she wore at fundraisers, the one meant to say, "We belong here." My father's smile was thinner. Tucker leaned back in his chair, like he'd already decided the evening was boring. They were 3 people in a room filled with meaning, and yet they had no idea what was about to unfold. And I didn't feel anger, I felt stillness. Because this moment, this room, they had built it in their minds for someone else. For a version of me that was quieter, smaller, more forgettable. The girl who joined the army to sort files somewhere, who never caused problems, never needed celebration. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Hadn't been for a long time. And tonight, the world would see that. With or without them looking. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the hall, like a velvet curtain. The commanding general rose from his seat, the sound of his dress shoes measured and deliberate as he approached the podium. The man commanded respect without raising his voice. He didn't need theatrics, only presence. He began with a story. Not mine, not at first. He spoke of a mission that shouldn't have worked. Hostile terrain, a rescue op layered in risk. 37 personnel encircled with less than 48 hours of viability. Command lost contact twice. Enemy drones detected movement. And then something shifted. He detailed a strategy no one else dared to attempt. A misdirection maneuver, executed with ruthless precision, not a single casualty. Murmurs rose across the room as he spoke. Tucker leaned forward, visibly intrigued now. My mother clutched her wineglass just a little tighter. And the architect of that operation, the general said, his voice low but unmistakable, was not just brave. She was surgical, unflinching, respected by every soul under her command. A pause. A leader who now stands among the finest this force has produced. Another pause. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and join me in honoring the commander of Operation Silver Shield, General Danica Rowe. I stood. Not quickly, not triumphantly. I simply stood. My uniform pressed to perfection. The silver star on my shoulder caught the light and flared against the medallions behind me. I turned to face the room, and I found them. 3 rows from the back. My father squinted as if he were trying to place a face he hadn't seen in a decade. My mother blinked, her mouth slightly parted. And then I heard it, clear, unfiltered, and loud enough to pierce the silence. Tucker leaned sideways toward our mother and said, "Wait, who is she?" The sound that followed wasn't laughter. It wasn't gasps. It was stillness, a vacuum of sound that wrapped around the room like a glass shell. The general heard it too. He didn't hesitate. He leaned into the microphone, his voice cold steel. "That's General Danica Rowe," he said. "She's the one who led your cousin home." He didn't look at me. He looked directly at their table. And just like that, the story they'd told themselves for 20 years, the story of the quiet daughter, the one who didn't need support, who disappeared into the background, collapsed. My mother's hand flew to her chest. My father went pale, his expression slack with something like injury. And Tucker's smirk didn't just vanish. It shattered. Whatever version of me he'd held in his mind no longer existed. I was not an afterthought. I was not a phase. I was a general. And the world had just learned it before they ever bothered to ask. The applause began in waves, rising, echoing, relentless. But I didn't hear any of it. Because the only sound I truly registered was the absence of theirs. And it was perfect. The moment the ceremony ended, the room shifted into motion. Standing ovations, camera flashes, the creak of chairs as people rose to applaud. My fellow officers formed a quiet line beside me, some saluting, some simply nodding with a respect that needed no words. And through all of it, I saw them. They looked like people who had just witnessed a world end. My mother moved first. She broke away from the back, one hand clutching her purse, the other reaching out like I was still 5 years old and had wandered too far from her shopping cart. Her heels clicked unevenly against the marble floor. "Danica," she said, breathless. "Oh, sweetheart, we had no idea." Her voice cracked on the last word, but it wasn't grief. It was shock, and maybe fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from danger, but the kind that comes from seeing something you can't control. Behind her, my father followed. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched like a man walking into a cold wind. He didn't speak, just kept his eyes on me like he wasn't sure I was real. Then came Tucker, still trying to smile, still trying to own the room like he always had. He moved in with that easy swagger that had won over teachers, bosses, girlfriends, or parents, but his eyes were uncertain, and his grin didn't quite reach the corners of his face. "Wow, sis," he said, forcing a laugh. "Guess you've been busy." He tried to swing an arm around my shoulder, like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. I stepped slightly to the side, not sharply, not rudely, just enough for the gesture to collapse under its own weight. His arm dropped. I didn't speak. Instead, I looked at each of them in turn. At my mother, still trying to wrap this moment in nervous smiles. At my father, who had nothing to offer but presence, which had always been the bare minimum. And at Tucker, whose entire identity had been built on being the one who mattered most. They were scrambling for control of a narrative that had slipped completely out of their hands, and in their confusion, I saw the echo of every skipped ceremony, every unanswered call, every time they talked about me, like I was the strong one, the simple one, the soldier who didn't need anything at all. I didn't feel anger. That had burned out long ago. What I felt was absence. The complete weightless clarity of knowing I didn't owe them a single sentence. My officers must have sensed it. Without cue or command, they moved in around me, silent, composed, forming a quiet wall between the past and the present. And then the commanding general stepped beside me. "General Rowe," he said, voice steady. "Your debriefing is ready when you are." I met his gaze, gave a single nod, then turned toward the exit. Behind me, I heard my mother say something, maybe my name. I didn't turn. I didn't slow. I didn't acknowledge the movement behind me as they tried to follow. I had already left the part of me that needed their recognition somewhere long before tonight, and I didn't intend to carry it back. It's been a year since that night, since I walked out of the gala with ribbons on my chest and nothing tethering me to the rows of faces behind me. Since I finally understood that the loudest freedom is the kind that makes no noise at all. I now live in Arlington, just a few blocks from the Pentagon. My mornings start before dawn, usually with briefing memos and intelligence maps laid out like puzzles waiting to be solved. I command strategy cells. I speak in acronyms and probabilities. I give orders that ripple across continents. But I never forget where I started. Because even here, in this city of power and protocol, I carry something no title can give me peace. Not the kind found in hobbies or small talk, but the kind you earn after surviving 1,000 quiet cuts and learning how to stop the bleeding yourself. My peace is the silence of a war room at 3 a.m., the calm before a decision that could change everything. It's mentoring a young officer whose hands shake during her first field report and reminding her that strength isn't about volume. It's about standing still when everything else wants to pull you down. I see myself in them sometimes, especially the women, the ones who over-prepare, who speak last because they want to be sure. The ones who've been told you're so mature for your age, like it's a compliment, when it's really a burden. I don't tell them my story, not all of it, but I make sure they know one thing. You do not need to be seen by those who refuse to look. You only need to be seen by those who know how. After the ceremony, my family tried to reach me for weeks. Texts, calls, old pictures of us as kids resurfaced on social media, posted by Tucker with captions like, "Couldn't be prouder of my sister." My mother sent emails with heart emojis and links to articles about my work, as if forwarding press clippings could count as love. My father stayed silent, which was the only consistency he ever offered me. Eventually, I opened my contacts list. I found their names, and I blocked them. No anger, no drama, just a decision. One keystroke, one breath, one life finally uncluttered. These days, my world is smaller but fuller. The people around me know the weight of silence, the cost of discipline, the kind of loyalty that doesn't fade when it's no longer convenient. I don't miss my family. Not really. You can't miss something that was never yours to begin with. What I do carry is the legacy I've chosen for myself. A legacy not built on their absence, but on my endurance. Some nights when the city quiets and the lights from the Capitol fade into a soft haze, I pour a cup of black coffee, sit by the window, and watch the stars. They don't know me either, But they shine anyway, and so do I.